This is Bitnar Talks, the engineer takes on construction. Episode 3. Hi, I'm Piotr Bitnar. Each day I help my clients plan and design building projects through Bitnar Limited, a consulting chartered structural engineer's practice. My biggest passion and the cornerstone on which I've built my business is finding clever solutions for construction projects. I am a chartered structural engineer and a budding software developer, so you can rest assured that I will strive to talk about the best practices and the use of new technologies in the industry. And if you're embarking on a construction project or are involved in planning, designing and building the world around us, you'll find this podcast useful. This episode is about Stage 1, Preparation and Brief. Hello everyone, welcome to Bitnar Talks, where your host takes you on the mammoth task of improving the construction industry one podcast at a time. Well, at least that is my goal and the purpose of my podcast. I want to tell you, my lovely audience, how things look like from the perspective of a person who loves the industry, the inventiveness and resilience of people within it, but thinks we could do so much better and that our action shouldn't be determined by the legislation but by best interest of all stakeholders. By interest, I do not mean money. The currency that operates in my office and the one I tend to gospel about left, right and center are the principle of SQUIN, square. That's sustainability, necessity, quality and improvement. In my view, the project needs to have at least 3 of these qualities to be realistically worthwhile. It may not be sustainable, but if it's needed and is of a good quality and will improve the current situation, we think it's a good project to go ahead with. Obviously, the best way forward would be, in every single case, to have a sustainable project on our books. But truth be told, it's not always the case. Another week has passed and I'm becoming more confident in the creation of this podcast. The post-processing becomes smoother and your face-to-face feedback steers me in the right direction, I hope. Well, at least I start to appreciate the process more, its constraints in terms of the breadth and depth of discussed matters, and my lack of skill of storytelling. My promise to you, dear listener, is that I will strive to improve that side of things with coming up episodes. The last episode concentrated on the first stage of the process called strategic definition, one of the 2 pre-designed stages of the plan of work process. The birth moment of your project and the decision to move forward with it. I emphasized how important that part of the process is and that it is paramount to engage with experienced consultants to inform on this decision. Unless you are a hotel chain or a property magnate, it is unlikely you'll have enough skill and knowledge to do it on your own. And sure, if you're short on money, but long on time, like anything else in this life, you may try to figure it out on your own, or call your local friendly multidisciplinary office, like Bitnar, or chance it, like the most. There you have it. I hope you like my maybe not so subtle product placement. Now, I trust you would much more prefer me start talking about the topic of this podcast, so without further ado, let's get to it. This episode is about Stage 1, Preparation and Brief. Remember, Stage 1 isn't the first stage in the process, it is the second stage of pre-design part of plan of work. The whole process begins with Stage 0, strategic definition, that I treated about in the last episode. And it's important to realize that the whole process starts from Stage 0, like in computer science. Most of the lists generally, they start from 0. The counting of them starts from 0 and then carries on forward. So Stage 1. Well, in this podcast I'll tell you what it's all about. I'll briefly mention the preparation part of it, which is like going into a research, it's like going on a research trip to find out what, why, who, how, and when. Then we move to brief, which combines all of the information gathered during the preparation phase to inform how the project should go ahead and whether the way we wanna approach it, the approach further definition of it, is aligned with what clients actually needs and want. It is a live document that will be developed in the further stages, but it is the first. It is a strategy to move forward. It is a document that shows that what, why, who, how, and when. There's plenty of things to consider within this stage, so I will briefly mention most of them. I'll skip over most of them, as it would be a material for an entire podcast to treat about any single one of them. So as you can appreciate, it will be too much. I've tried to talk about too many things in my first podcast, and that wasn't received that well. So I rather just let you know about the parts that are important there, but quickly move forward to hopefully be able to paint a picture of the whole stage rather than going into nitty-gritties of the process. I will likely treat more about it in one of those parts in more detail, and most likely in subsequent podcasts that will be specifically designed to target every single one of them. So why bother? Well, it is a good question, why bother? Well, after all, you can just go on and do the building, right? Yeah, sort of. To illustrate you better why it is important to do it, as with any endeavor really, if you don't have a strategy for it, you will struggle and you will not really know why you failed or why it was success. So it's good to know, good to put that down and make it visual. Make the strategy, make the brief available to everyone that will be involved in the project, as there will be then less scope for misinterpretation and going the wrong way and wasting resources. So I'll tell you about two stories that I think paint the picture just well. One will be about the house builders, Georgie and Diana, and the baby. And I talk about the project manager, Steve, smart ass, has it all, done it all, worked as a manager of Thames Water, seen the work of best offices, knows better than everyone else. So what can go wrong there? I think I'll point out what in several minutes' time. So we know now that we want to build, we know what sort of project we want to build, and the general direction from the employer. Now it's time to go out there, get the right consultants in place, and start assembling the design team. Or even before the design team, let's assemble the team that can inform the best way forward with the design team later on. Let's find out whether the project is feasible. Let's find out let's do all of the feasibility studies that may need to be included to inform the next stages a little bit better. Let's get that structural engineering in place and advise on what sort of building is buildable to the constraints and opportunities of that particular site. Now, once we have all of those information in, you can move on into putting all of that into a legal document called the brief, on which everyone else's will be building their information packages. See, the things to consider to be included within the brief will vary from the project to the project, but generally there are these that I will mention now. I managed to sift out 16 points, really, which I think are quite important and the parts that are usually needed on any given project. And that these are: number one, what is it to be built? What type of the building it is? What form of building it is? What size of the building can we build within the budget we got? what material we can use, what materials are available to us, what way we want to build it, whether we want to do it cast in, framed, modern method of construction, modularize it, or what else. That's the great place for the structural engineer to kick in and inform a lot of this on a lot of these questions. Indeed, what is the budget for all of it? It is the biggest constraint of any project. You may want to build a hotel, but you may have budget for 20 rooms, not for 50 or even 22. So it's very important to be realistic with your budget and put the boundaries of how far we want to push that budget to. Because the further you push it, the more risk is involved. Number 3, what is the site? Is it on a slope? Is it on a quagmire? Is it by the river? Is it on a hill? Where is it? Is orography of the site important? Size? So there's plenty of things to consider here. Next one would be, what are the sustainability credentials for the particular project? What way we want to approach it? Whether we want to go for the passive net zero building, or maybe energy plus building, or maybe something completely different. What type of certification, accreditation will stick? Will it going to be LEED, BREEAM, anything else? Those are very important questions at the word go, because you need, depending on what sort of answer you give here, the different way you're gonna go. Number 5 will be, what are the risks associated with the project, and that will be budget and whether we can meet the standards to deliver, whether there's health and safety risk involved, and others. Number 6, what team members are needed to collate all of that information and to list them down and put them down in a matrix of responsibility, clearly stated who is responsible for what. Number 7, what information is required and to what detail. You see, many often you have engineering designs that are just conceptual, and then you have to take it further and do more and think about the project in detail. Whether you're gonna use BIM, and if you will, who will manage it, and to what level of definition. That's my point 8. Number 9, what is the envisaged project program? When do you want to do which part and accomplish which part? You see, some parts may drag for too long. If you don't give it a deadline, we can try to make the best building possible and never build it. Number 10, what is the envisaged project execution plan? How are we gonna build the actual building, taking the constraint on the sides and the chosen way of construction? And if that's reasonable or not. If we don't know it at this stage, we may be pushing for solutions that will be ill-defined and won't be able to economically and safely execute them on site. Number 11, what are the planning constraints? Whether we are impacted by nutrients neutrality bill or biodiversity. What are the local idiosyncrasies and vernacularity that will influence how the building can be positioned and how the building will cooperate, how the building will work in the background of the existing town, existing site, existing surroundings. Shall we start pre-planning discussion with the planning office? If it's a bigger project, it may be prudent to start the engagement at the very, very, very beginning of the whole process. If we don't know how it sits with the local planning office, it will be difficult to go through all of those hoops that they may throw our way. It is important to, number 13, engage local people and groups of interest to see what's needed in the area, how this need can be addressed within the budget and within the constraints of that budget, and whether we can enhance the local area, peoples and groups of interests cases, but we can address them some way that will improve the life of the people in and around the project. We need to start thinking about the health and safety of that project, thinking CDM regulations and obligation it puts on us. If it's a big project, it is the time now to start thinking about collating the health and safety file. The very important point 15 is if the project is actually feasible, looking at all of those studies and information we already gathered, going through planning, seeing what sort of structure can be built, whether there's enough skill in the area to deliver that on the planning scope and delivery scope, and whether it's feasible to actually build. And number 16, how are we going to approach the procurement of that given project? These are all 16 points that can make or break any given project. And if we don't really have to think about every single one of them in a big detail, but failing to observe any given one can make or break the project. And these are not by any means exhaustive list of things to be considered, but these are generally the basics that should be thought of before you put the first shovel in the ground, or even before you start putting the first drafts on paper, trying to find the best solution for given brief. So why bother? That's quite a silly question here, isn't it? Thinking that there's at least 16 points that you should look at, and taking that, indeed, if you're not a property magnate of any sort, you may not be aware of any of these given things, and it will be tough and difficult to find all of the answers about any of those points. And taking there is more points that can be, or that need to be thought about before you get on with the project and start appointing design teams and all of the people that will define the project and build it. If you don't have a proper brief in place and you don't put that down and show it in black and white, it's open for interpretation from every given side. And very often, more often than not, it is a massive waste of time and resources down the line. And I think I'll be able to show you that in two stories I got prepared for you. The first one is about a young family. It's Georgie and Diana. They are a couple in their 30s, young, healthy professionals, owning their own house with manageable mortgage on it, with good careers, and now with baby on board in the oven. Now they realize that they will need some more space, and by the way, the story is true. The story is taken from one of the experiences we had in the office, but all of the details are changed. So if you see yourself in that description, in that story, you know who I'm talking about if you dealt with us. But I think this type of the story is quite universal and across borders, county line borders, if you like. So George and Diana, they need more space. They think that the love conversion will be the great addition, and that will actually allow them to utilize their space. They live in a typical terrace house, 2-story terrace house with 2 bedrooms on the first story, living and a kitchen downstairs, and the loft, which is unused and cold. And I think if they change that, they could spare one room for the baby. The second one can remain as an office, as it is now, home office. And then they can move upstairs to have the beautiful bedroom they dream about, en suites with all amenities, with a nice overlook of neighboring gardens. Although taking savings plus mortgage, as they need to remortgage to afford the house, they embark on the process of educating themselves on the process. No one now will tell them about the structural plan of work or plan of work per se. Most professional bodies will align their advice with the plan of work, but the truth be told, not many actual professionals are involved in designing and managing this type of projects. So they embark on educating themselves. They find whatever information they can Google, Bing, or Safari. I don't know. I don't have a device with the decomposing Apple. So they visit architects' websites and blogs, join Facebook groups, bought few design magazines and read them through. And they started dreaming of a bedroom with an ensuite. After several weeks of deciding what they wanna and what they don't wanna do, how much it would more or less cost, reading websites and listening to Facebook comments, they decided they're educated enough and ready for some action. Then they send out 10 emails asking for a quotation for planning drawings, as they fall under impression anyone can do initial drawings. Then you need an engineer who will do the calculation, report for steels, and you can approach builders to quote and move things forward. They choose nearly the cheapest quote, seeing lovely pictures of projects on the website. The architectural designer named Agnes is a lovely lady who comes in to measure the house up, take pictures and talk about the requirements. Says the loft extension is under permitted development rights, so no need for planning. With the general arrangement plans, they approach an engineer recommended by one of the builders who came in to quote on the architectural plans only. They got to the report, employed the builder. They got the report, employed the builder, and the builder got cracking with the build. After 6 months from the initial realization of need, they enjoy their new space. After a couple of more months, they receive a letter from the local planning officer saying the dormer extension is not PD and will need to go through planning or risk enforcement notice. This brings dread and insurmountable amounts of stress on the couple and the poor Diana in her late months of pregnancy. They decided to first engage with the planning officer to take their advice. When they consulted the planning officer, it transpired that they may also need a sign-off certificate from the building control office, and they were told that there is no paper trace of their building on their system. Now, they employed Bitna to advise on the matters. We took them through the planning process and managed to secure retrospective planning permission, but the amount of work required to regularize the building control, including localized strengthening of structures, fireproofing the junction between houses, insulation, assuring there is enough provision for the fire escape and enough headroom to discharge access requirements of building regulations, not to mention the space is cramped and there is no room for ensuite in the first place. Ensuite, pardonnez-moi. You ask about the Facebook Agnes, builder and the engineer now. No one picks up the phone or replies to letters. Builder is dissolved and the engineer was just in the name, not registered with any professional institution whatsoever. After several years, plenty of stress and living in uncertainty in non-sellable, non-insurable house, the rectification now approaches nearly half of the initial project costs. This is a disaster. This is the disaster on a personal level of the worst of the kinds. The family will be living with this situation for the rest of their life, and they will struggle financially for the next half a decade, if not more. So why bother again? After all, I'm a great project manager. And that puts us to the story number 2. Steve, the project manager. I've received an email out of nowhere from a Google account asking whether we're interested as Bitna Limited in providing structural and civil engineering design package for the project. A long list of expectations followed that email, and from the word go. After an exchange of emails and my explanation that the building project is a two-way street and I need to first find out if the projects are properly defined, there is enough money for professional services, who is involved in the project, who is the architect, who is the project manager, who is the contractor, and what's the procurement route here. You know, the basic things that expose whether the prospective client is ready to collaborate with you on the project or not likely. There is no point of producing a pamphlet or long list of recommendations, past projects, insurance information, and any of these things just without knowing all of those details. If you do, you don't know who you share those information with. That's the first. Secondly, it doesn't make sense to waste money on the circumstances where this is not going anywhere. It's just a one of hundreds of emails to anyone, just trying to fish out as much information as possible. So that's the first stage how we usually approach qualifying our leads. The scheme, it transpires, is £1.6 million scheme for the construction of several 3-story terraced houses on a 2-way sloping site with lower ground floor with back garden and fronting street with front light well, entrance at the street level. That's ground level. I've received several hundred pages of reports, planning drawings, basement impact assessments, and such for my perusal. I've taken an hour of my time to go through all of those documents, especially that I was intrigued that in the initial email the gentleman Steve asks for the building impact assessment where he already got 2, but both of them are silly ones from the eye of well-versed and grounded professionals, and they were just done for the sake of discharging planning permission inquiries. And I always, in this sort of circumstance, ask why. That's already wasted money for 2 different reports from 2 different soil engineering companies, but without any good information that you can actually base any of the designs on. That's several £1,000s wasted just there, where a well-versed chartered structural or civil engineer could just provide a brief report or simple statement of confidence that the project can be done taken the circumstances. You see, there's already a chain of terrace houses right to the left of that, lower down the slope, and to the right of it, upper up the slope. So with a great confidence, it's hard to say something is not working when you see that it's being built upon in the same way and it is working. Anyway, that comes with experience and the way of approaching things. If you do not have right professionals at this stage, you end up going out and paying for all of the information that's unnecessary. So I emailed back saying the project is not well defined, that we will gladly do it, but these are our preliminary terms, and I issued this to the lovely gentleman. I've received the email back from a person who felt that his character was blemished. With saying with the email reading in the sorts of "How dare you say the project is not well defined? I am a seasoned professional, work with the best of the best of the best in the industry, and it is I who will dictate conditions, contracts and approaches." Well, it goes without saying that we declined participation in this collaboration. Clients learned nothing new and will go on to spend fee on unnecessary work if he finds people who will just push the design out for him to execute. This is typical for ignorant or cocky approach, especially if the only aspect of the project manager experience is to deliver on instructions and not take creative part in the project definition and actual creation of brief. If you do not see the benefit of this part of the project, then you cannot blame such an individual not to understand what sort of impact it got further down the line. It's just what it is, and we need this sort of project managers that simply pushing the paperwork and assuring that everything is in place and just build what they've been told to build, whether that's by the best offices in the world or just a simple family-run engineering business. Now, for both stories, it is too late for stage one to come about. It is obvious that preparation has been flawed and the brief either non or mostly non-existent or ill-defined. The damage to the family life and finances as a result of such an approach is insurmountable, as I said previously. How wasteful it can be. And building those houses the way that cocky Steve approaching it will be wasteful. So you see, on one side we have a damage of a family life and finances, on the other side we have a wasteful construction and building at the end of the second. In the first, damage is apparent, but in the second, the damage is hidden. And it's this type of the damage that usually comes with headlines that the buildings, especially the massive builds for governments, that the builds are over budget. After all, the best are designing these buildings and they know how to protect their interests. And if no one wants to pay for the proper definition of and proper participation in the whole process, well, they deliver as much and as well as they can for the risks that they can accommodate. And all of the rest of the cost is pushed down the taxpayer. Well, that's me and you. Unfortunately, none of these stories are a positive one, but the ill-defined or non-existent processes, they very rarely end up on a positive note. They usually end up in disasters or in the expenditure, whether they're gonna be in terms of the environment or money. You can appreciate how complex this world can be, can't you? These two stories, one about Georgie and Diana, and the second one about Cocky Steve, are a drop in the ocean of possible screw-ups. Unfortunately, these type of scenarios are all too often, and as much as I enjoy helping these people and families getting out of the quagmire, I would rather see project delivered well from the word go. It is pretty staggering to know anyone can design and execute your building. No license required, no hard stops for typical buildings. Luckily, these tragedies are usually financial, but casually financial difficulties cause relationships degradation, often leading to suicides. So be careful out there. It is a perilous world, and there is not enough information to prepare you for it. You see, well-versed professionals are very often lost and very often exposed only to the particular part of that world, and not many of us do the actual bigger picture. You see, it does not cost much to receive a right advice before you start. Somehow, it is one of the easiest budgetary cuts that you can make. But if you consider several £100 a lot for an advice on a small project, say 50 to 150,000 pounds, or several thousands on larger schemes over 1 million pounds, then you either do not have enough money to move forward, or you are looking for savings in wrong places. In either case, stop. But if you want to do your own research, I will always be sending you to the institutions, renowned British institutions that offer a lot of free advice. And if you do want to do your own research, it's always a great idea to start on the RIBA website or IStructT websites and use their free resources. That's including finding your local engineer or local architect. Both can help you with your project, for better or worse. Combined, then they can make a magic happen. For the initial conversation, you can always call Bitna for a 15 minutes free advice, or you can book a 30 minutes paid advice and send us material, and we can talk about the actual issue on hand you got there. There's also a booking section available to you with our curated service packs, whether that be for architectural and engineering, or just engineering, or survey type of services. But it all starts with initial advice and then can take it much, much further. You will find all the details on Bitna website. Just go to booking section of it. I would also like to let you know about the newest Rebus publication in collaboration with Sustrans and the Association of Collaborative Design. As I've been recording this podcast, they released a brilliant publication that ties local engagement with the plan of work. That means bringing local people to advise and inform of the needs of locals. So that's that for today. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed listening to it as much as I've enjoyed preparing it for you. If you think it is worth your while, I encourage you to subscribe and comment under this episode. Reach out to me on LinkedIn and comment under my posts. Let us talk and let our voice carry. It will carry further and enhance our conversation when you subscribe, like and comment. I understand that you may not give this podcast much hope. After all, the online statistics are ruthless. They say that the last year 90% of podcasts did not publish more than 3 episodes, and the remaining 90% did not go over the 20th episode mark. Well, I like to be at the top, so you can expect at least 21 episodes from me. Frankly, I'm doing it for you, and it also improves me as a speaker and make my thoughts to come about more freely in the way I express them. What not to like here? Even if there is only one person ever having to listen to this episode, I think it will be worth it, as any conversation I ever have face to face with anyone else is. Do not be afraid. No specialist or expert has all the answers or sees any given situation or problem in the right way. It is the directed effort of many people and discussions that bring about beautiful and successful projects, as well as make our lives better. Thank you for listening. Please voice up your opinions. I want to hear from you. Toodaloo.